morning. Hi there, it's a lovely sunny morning in Brighton. We're here for the Ideas Test, Ideas Camp webinar. This is a follow-up to an actual Ideas Camp we ran last weekend in Sittingbourne in North Kent, funded by Recreate EU Fund and coordinated and run by Ideas Test, the Arts Council funded Creative People and Places project in North Kent. Last week's Ideas Camp was all about ideas, how you get a good idea, how you develop a good idea, and how you turn that maybe into production or an event or a piece of work. We had 4 speakers last weekend, but today for you we've got 2 speakers. First, Jim Byford, researcher in residence at the Fusebox 24 project in Brighton, and secondly, Sophie Giblin from Collective Gallery and a whole host of other really interesting entrepreneurial activities. So I'm going to hand over to Jim now, who's going to talk for about 20 minutes. If you've got questions, please do tweet us those questions at Ideas Test on Twitter, at Ideas Test, all one word, all lowercase, on Twitter. Take it away, Jim.
Thanks, John, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to be sharing some insights and experiences from what's been going on in Brighton during this whole Recreate project. So, we set up the Fusebox in March 2013. We designed a programme last year, and it was an experimental initiative building on learnings from a pilot that came out of the Brighton Fuse research, which you can find out about at brightonfuse.com. That's the sort of backdrop. And this is all about trying to put the arts, science, technology, business, all into a big melting pot in a wonderful place in Brighton called New England House, and supporting some people with ideas to turn them into businesses. So I'm going to sort of step inside a toolbox, which is really about the approach we took, and hopefully give you some practical things that you can think about, put into use in your own development of ideas, I guess. So I'm going to take you through a few slides and explain a bit more about what we've been doing. So Fusebox 24 was 24 weeks of startup support for innovators to turn them into businesses. So I'm going to sort of step inside a toolbox, which is really about the approach we took, and hopefully give you some practical things that you can think about, put into use in your own development of ideas, I guess. So I'm going to take you through a few slides and explain a bit more about what we've been doing. So Fusebox 24 was 24 weeks and deliver something quite special and unique to you. So 24 weeks. I'm going to sort of step inside a toolbox, which is really about the approach through a 4-stage process, which this slide practical things that you can shows right in the middle. Think 4 weeks of immersion, 4 weeks of readiness, 12 weeks of iterations, and then 4 weeks of jump, which prepared people for taking their idea outside into a space other than the Fusebox. So we grounded the whole thing on 3 concepts: needs, empathy, and insight, and established a research project around all of this. So as researcher in residence, really what I was there to do was create new knowledge, exchange it between the arts sector, the business sector, the university. And the University of Brighton very supportively guided me through the process of developing what amounted to a knowledge exchange research project, largely action research, but with a report written at the end of it. So all the findings are encapsulated in that report, and you can find that online at fusebox24.co.uk. So let me tell you a bit more about how we got all of this up and running. Adventuresome wisdom. That was the flavour that I gave to the programme. That really summed up the spirit and the ethos of it. So taking people into a whole new learning environment, but not trying to baffle people with complex academic concepts, but also trying to make it feel like this was something that you could only really do once in your life. And perhaps you'd repeat the experience in different ways, but it was going to be unique. So the wisdom of others, very important in this. So this place, New England House, this is where it all happened. Strange old building. Actually, I've come to really love it. I used to hate it. I thought it was ghastly and it should have been bulldozed a long time ago. But when you get inside it, how rich the mix and diversity is. It's brilliant. I love the fact that there are businesses that have been there since it opened in the 50s. There are some really interesting artists in residence there who've been there for a long time. And so there's a very, very interesting blend of culture. It's Brighton in microcosm, that place for me. So having been around the city for 20 years, to come into that environment with a space, 3,500 square feet, really as a blank canvas, very, very interesting and very, very wonderful opportunity for me to try and creatively program something over 24 weeks. So this is what it looked like on the inside. We recruited, this time last year, we were in the final stages of recruiting 15 people who brought an idea at a very early stage. They committed to being in the space for the 24 weeks. They paid £40 a week, roughly, a head to be in the space, and they had to commit to the idea of working together as a group. So the principles of creative collaboration, innovation, that's really what so this is what it looks like on the inside. It's set up to be about. We recruited, this time last year, born out of the final stages of recruiting 15 there really, and so an idea at a very early stage. In a very short period they committed to time to be created a minimum viable product, which was essentially the Fusebox website to recruit these people. They came in with their idea and we put them through lots and lots of different exercises. I'm going to talk a bit more about some of those tools and exercises, but just want to give you a picture at this stage. This group here, we're doing an exercise as it happens in the early stages where their idea was being fleshed out on whiteboards on wheels, and the idea was pulled apart into the format of the lean canvas, and this exercise was actually called the fat canvas. So the idea was on rotation, everybody moved around everybody else's ideas, adding some fat to those very early stage ideas in the business model context. So very interesting session. Everybody got lots out of it, lots of iteration, all very important stuff. So the program itself, 24 weeks is actually quite a long time to work with an idea and to hold it. So we introduced the idea quite early on of programming in a very open way in the space. So everybody that came in could see what we were doing, and everybody on the program could see what was coming up. It also gave us the opportunity to work with the group to reassign priority to things. So on occasions, some things would be pushed back and other things would be brought forward. We would openly discuss how it would all work. So the idea of the 24 weeks being visible as a plan, as a schedule in the space became very, very important. And as you can see to the right on the image here, some obligatory post-it notes on the wall, but this area to the right was a space where the participants on the program voluntarily offered up skills to each other, requests for advice and support to and from each other, and also thanks. It was a very nice way of sort of symbolising the way that the group collaboratively came together. So this was born out of a Monday morning check-in, which was one of the sort of anchor features of the programme. Everyone brought their sort of immediate needs and status to the group. This was something that came out of the pilot programme, which Sophie, who's going to be talking after me, went through, and we learned that actually getting everybody to come together and talk about where they were at was incredibly rich and valuable. And as I say, this area of the wall emerged as a real sort of symbol of that process, and people would go off and help each other in various different practical ways. So a lot of collaboration, and real collaboration, as in people genuinely making new things happen together. And this all started off very early on. It's all about getting people out of their comfort zone and interacting with the space. So we brought in a sculpture kit from the Phoenix Gallery, something that had been commissioned for the Cultural Olympiad. 540 very tough plastic, very bright pink plastic pieces, which can be put together in various different ways. And we had great fun spending half a day really interacting together with the space, with the Wired Sussex team. So lots and lots of different dynamics. And at this point in the programme, a couple of weeks in, we had no idea how these businesses were going to emerge, how they were going to occupy the space, who was going to want to claim territory or not, who might be disrupting the overall dynamics down the line. We didn't know any of that. So we let people play with the space, with a medium here being this sculpture kit, and it was great fun. Everybody really enjoyed themselves, and we got lots out of it. And that enabled us, that sense of experimental play, that enabled us to take people out of their comfort zones even more. So working with the artist in practice in the space, CC Blumstein, I had the great pleasure of being able to dream up even more challenging exercises as the program unfolded. And this example here, which was a photo taken during the Brighton Festival, we took a group outside and we wanted to get them outside very, very early on in the program and to encounter the public with an idea and a challenge. And so during the last Friday of the Brighton Festival, we posed the Hemingway Challenge, which was one of the great successes of the program as an exercise, a 6-word story, and that was apparently Hemingway's greatest achievement when asked what was his favourite work, was writing the story, For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn, which we took to the group as challenge and said, right, okay, first thing you've got to do is take your idea outside. So we gave them the first 2 words, for sale, and asked them to construct the remaining 4 words and work in a small group, take them out to a public and see what sort of response they would get. And for some, this was quite monumental. There were a few personal epiphanies just about really engaging with the public and what it takes to put an idea across, the language you use, just the feeling of trying to get something across in a new way. All very important, powerful stuff. So a lot came from doing these exercises and getting people out there.
Hey Jim, can I ask you a question?
Please do.
What kind of other projects, what sort of projects were happening? Were they arts projects, were they startups, were they designers, were they techs?
We had a real mix. The people coming in, like I say, we focused on the innovators really rather than the ideas. But just to give you a flavour, we had a music concept, a collaborative music platform. We had an outsourcing platform for mums looking to get back into the workforce, a bit like Mechanical Turk, but for mums specifically. We had a comms innovation agency that really wanted to just focus on big long-term challenges. We had Brighton Fashion Week. We had a group of 3D printing robotics types that wanted to work with kids in schools. We also had some other ideas that were embryonic and turned into things along the way. We had a social gift experience. We had, I think that's about the flavour of it. We had a concept that somebody tested for the first 6 weeks and discovered that the feasibility tools that we put in place for that first 6 weeks were enough for him to say, actually, I don't think my idea's got enough data behind it, enough insight behind it. And so that was the only person who didn't see the full programme through. But like I say, I think he, in his exit interview, said what was really valuable was putting that idea to test, going outside and getting real feedback on it. So that's the flavour.
So another question from Twitter. That last question was from Genetic Moo. Another question, are you surprised that so many of the projects were successful? Because we're talking about, say, 12 out of 13 or 13 out of 14?
Well, actually, as it turns out, the 14 people that saw the programme through represented 10 concepts, of which I think 75% were limited companies by the end of it, and with a couple of social enterprises and one as a cooperative. I wasn't surprised because I think the people that came onto the programme were genuinely committed. I mean, to come into the space, commit to 24 weeks, to make this a primary activity. Some of them were freelancing here and there, but they were all committed to the idea of seeing their idea emerge. 6 months, that's quite a long time to make it primary focus. So they were particularly brave, determined people. Answer the question?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Carry on.
Okay. This image here is taken on a very large day of the program. I mean, to come into the space, committed to 24 weeks. I'm really drawn to it, so it's a terrible photo. The group here devised an activity of their own, so we'd taken them on 24 weeks of supported activities, but along the way, what we tried to do was open up the real learning style of the program as being something that was very open and inclusive and collaborative, and was all about knowledge sharing. So in this particular example, Richard and Beth from Loop.coop, who made a fantastic music collaboration platform, wanted to test a concept for how they were going to actually make some money out of this platform, and they very interestingly devised a game that they got the entire group to play, which was called Monetizing Consequences. And then we played it for a morning, and everybody got to experience the way that they saw their business model potentially emerging. So it was a great test, and it was designed entirely in the spirit of the program, which Richard and I actually coined the term serious fun, which represented serious play, but also the experience of doing something in a radical and challenging way. So lots and lots of things summed up in this image for me. Okay, I'm going to share with you a little bit more about the nature of the learning that took place and how it was we worked with quite a lot of diverse inputs. We put a lot of thinking into the program that really built on the Brighton Fuse, and so the idea was that we were trying to stimulate new businesses, new organisations to emerge, but we were really keen to get these innovators to take themselves really through a process which would build their long-term resilience. So when we came to write up the findings from the programme in the research report, distilling all of the data that we captured along the way, I put the tools into this triangle here to try and sort of sum up thematically what it was we were doing and how we were working with the participants. So this idea of disrupt and challenge at the top, that really sort of cut to the core of the whole thing. And for that, we put lots and lots of different exercises together, and the Bloom Sculpture Kit exercise at the top was one of the first ones that we used in that concept, to those particular ends. But we also brought in some people from the local community to run sessions with us. We had 9 what we called Fusebox sessions, which were Wednesday mornings, Wednesday evening seminars or presentations around skills and also around inspiration. And we also had a few people that came in and mentors in a very sort of broad, supportive way and challenged the participants as to the viability of their business models, for example. And it all seemed to work quite well. We had lots and lots of one-to-one sessions, and we found as the program went on that the participants were doing this with each other. So we were sort of planting seeds. People were responding to the way that the exercises or the sessions played out, and then taking things on and working them through themselves. So there wasn't just a sort of spirit of support with a structure around it. There was a really intrinsic research process to try and drive all of this as well. So the academic research project served not only as a wrapper for the whole project, but it gave a different type of legitimacy, I think, for some of the participants. In the feedback at one of the stages of the program, this actually came out in surveys, and it was very interesting that some of the participants, I think it was during the iteration stage, felt that having a research project underpinning all of this made it even easier to take risks, because whatever happened with their projects, they felt like they were contributing to something that in itself was generating new knowledge. So important to capture that role of the academic research dimension of this project. So the tools, lots and lots of different things that people did to interact with each other. We used the academic research construct to enable people to reflect in a structured way, and that happened with video interviews at the end of each of the 4 stages. We also had really important tools for maintaining the flow of the program. So the weekly check-in was pivotal in that. We also had a particular format that we introduced very early on in the program, the PechaKucha presentation, as a way of getting the participants to not only share with each other where they were coming from and what they were bringing as an idea, but as a way of demonstrating their progress and their learning. So in each phase of the program, a PechaKucha session was pretty much the coming together of where everybody was at and where their business idea was at. So that worked very well for us, and we were delighted with how effective the participants became in using that particular format to articulate their propositions. So that's the flavour of the tools. Just going to show you a few of the tools that we extracted at the end of the program as being transportable, if you like, and usable in other contexts. So some of these may be useful for people with ideas, innovators that are looking to develop their business propositions. So PechaKucha format presentations, as I say, very important throughout. We did lots and lots of work on these, and the group really came together and put a lot of effort into giving really good, critical, constructive feedback. We learned a lot about guiding that feedback process as well. It was very important. When we didn't provide instructions on how to critically feedback, we found that everyone was a bit nice to each other and didn't really challenge as much as they did when we gave a brief about how to do critical feedback. So we learned lots along the way as well. The bottom right is a very interesting image here. One of the participants got very immersed in the Brighton for Peace campaign, and it became the focus of his attention for a short period of time, which was a brilliant representation of the coming together of the group. And the image on the screen there, which looks like a band on stage, well, it was effectively a band on stage. It was a band of people that were on the programme who got together and created a political campaign. So all very interesting stuff, all of this going on in parallel to people developing their businesses. As I mentioned quite early on, the Lean Canvas was a key tool. We saw this really from the arts perspective as being a way of galvanising a single view of a new proposition and working it through in a way that enabled outsiders, business experts, to come in and immediately get where this business was at with clarity. And it meant that we could speed up processes of sharing ideas and developing them. So working with the Lean Canvas, fattening it up, very important. We also found that the Lean Canvas itself wasn't enough for a lot of the businesses, because a fair few of them had a really distinctive social mission in that they were very purpose-driven, that they needed to articulate not just visions of what they were trying to do, but they really wanted to develop themselves and their values as part of this whole experience. So the image here of the hand-drawn Lean Canvas came from one of the participants, and this also adds milestones, it adds beauty and good. And I thought this was a lovely way of really sort of condensing how all of these things played out.
Okay, Jim, quick question from
Yes.
Twitter. This is again from Genetic Moon. To what extent were the projects tested in the real world for feasibility?
Completely tested in the real world. The first 4 weeks, as I say, was immersion, was really about building connection between the group to challenge each other and set a tone for pushing each other out there and really doing things in the real world. So the readiness phase added some more tools, and we used a lot of lean startup approaches. The minimum viable product was introduced at that particular time. The whole customer journey, customer discovery journey, the Steve Blank 4 Steps to Epiphany. We used all of that sort of thinking, and we got people outside very, very early on in order that the 12 weeks of iteration became all about real world tests. So we expected to see ideas ditched, we expected to see fundamental pivots, and that's exactly what happened.
And another quick question from Sophie this time, before you get back to a narrative. When are you going to do another Fusebox 24 type project?
I understand that Wired Sussex are keen to roll out another programme later on in the year. So I would say check the wiredsussex.com blog for details on that. I don't think a date has been officially announced yet, but I'm pretty confident we're going to be doing another one in the autumn.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Back to your narrative.
The last thing here I just wanted to point out was the importance of having a whiteboard on wheels. We didn't ask for a great deal of resources for this project, but I was very, very keen for the participants and their ideas to be visible at all times in the Fusebox. We were asking people to be present in the space on Mondays and Fridays to work together, but we also wanted their ideas to be present in the space 24/7. So what we also learned from a research perspective that was very interesting was that some people wanted to protect their idea and be mindful of intellectual property issues and so on, but not everybody did. So people were actually more likely to share their ideas than they were to try and wrap them and hide them away. So from conventional wisdom on intellectual property and so on and so forth, we sort of paused on thinking about great lengths of going to protection and so on, invited the participants to seal up their ideas on day one and post them away and so on, and only a few did. So what we did, we enabled these ideas to breathe in the space, and as a consequence, I think people gained an awful lot more from having the input of others, so very important. We also introduced some tools, as I've mentioned, that enabled the groups to take ownership not only of the space but of the way that the programme unfolded. So interacting with each other, a lot of collaborative innovation going on. So the next iteration of the programme I'm really excited about because I think we learned so much from a simple framework that was, it took a lot of time to work through and build all the things in from the Fuse and ground up and so on. But I think we learned an awful lot about the tools to put in place, and that's why we call it groupware, not in the software sense. This was all analog, but it's interesting to see that people will take ownership not only of the space but what you do in it if you set the right conditions. So we have our own version of groupware to build on. Creative disruption is a really important part of this whole process. Taking people outside of their comfort zones, as we said, is something that is easy to say, difficult to do, particularly when you're working with people that are inherently creative and brave. So pushing people to really explore what that means, we've had a good go at that. So again, I'm really excited about the next iteration of just how much more we can build upon. So good successes when taking people outside. We'd love to do more of that and potentially explore other challenges that we can set in and around different times of year. So if we start a programme, for example, in the autumn, we can't exactly use the Brighton Festival, but we've got the Brighton Digital Festival to work with. So different ways and means of doing it. Another area that was great fun for us to explore was in making ideas tangible. CC, the artist in practice, and I had great fun working through some different ways of helping the innovators articulate what were quite complicated concepts. For example, we had one that I haven't mentioned yet, a social enterprise that was really keen on creating some disruption in the monetary system. Big idea, very, very complex critique, and actually it took some time to work through how they could articulate their proposition and work out what a minimum viable product could be and so on, which they did. And we helped unpack what it meant to get from critique to creativity by doing some exercises around making things. And that was a really enjoyable process. Making it and iterating it, sharing it, passing it on. We used a lot of junk. We literally got everybody to bring in their recycling, dump it all on a great big table, and work through a process of building out some features or some concepts that could be minimum viable products but made tangibly in 3 dimensions. And we built on these formats throughout the programme, and one that we ran towards the end of the programme within the last few weeks. It's very important, melding different ideas and approaches from different sectors. The Moscow model was one that I brought up quite early on with some of the participants about prioritising. So if you're trying to do complex software design, must, should, could, would is the acronym for working out what it is you're going to use as your base feature set for release 1.0, let's say. The coulds in that acronym, towards the end of the programme, I was just intrigued as to what people had on their list of coulds. So we had an afternoon session, which was great fun, where we just allowed people to play with some of the coulds. And they were allowed to play with them any time, but would they actually do it? Everybody was very focused on trying to get stuff out there and all the rest of it. But we thought it was very important in the spirit of the programme to keep that spirit of play and creativity and innovation alive throughout, particularly Cece's influence in that regard. So we took the participants on a little bit of a journey that particular afternoon, and we made a load of stuff and we had some great fun. And bottom corner here you can see Beth from Loop.coop, which was making a wonderful minimum viable product as Looptopia, a music making platform, and on their list of coulds was making musical instruments out of vegetables, which, yeah, of course they could, in theory, and so we gave them license to play with that concept, and it was great fun. They actually got some notes out of carrots and courgettes, and it was great fun. So it's important also to say at this point that we gave a real spirit of adventure to everyone in the Fusebox, I think, through doing this programme. And Cece, as an artist, responded to some of the stimulus in really interesting and surprising ways that we imagined she would as an artist. And she developed a very interesting minimum viable performance as a response to some of the work we were doing around minimum viable products. And she performed this 3 times, once another time at a seminar run by the University of Brighton with Professor Gillian Youngs and a group of women in innovation, I believe was the title of the seminar. Cece delivered the performance there, and also in Dortmund at ID Factory, which is a space very similar to the Fusebox, where Phil Jones, CEO of Wired Sussex, myself and Cece went for a fact-finding visit and discovered like minds with a very lateral approach. And Cece delivered the performance there, and it was wonderful, really wonderful way of sharing what it was that was coming out of our programme. So we learned a great deal about innovation and innovators. We had a lot of fun. We played. Oh, there is Beth with her penny whistle. I can't get any sound, but you can see it did actually work. So the last thing I wanted to say is about the research dimension of the project. Very important to work with the university and to give, as I said earlier, the project a sort of broader purpose, which is to contribute to the knowledge in the creative digital IT sector in Brighton, building on the Brighton Fuse, but doing this in a very experimental, Brighton-like way. The research dimension, Gillian Youngs and I worked together on a set of questions that we posed pre-programme and at the end of each stage, and they were around the concepts of needs, empathy and insight, and they were really about stimulating reflective practice and getting the participants to really think about needs, their own needs, needs of customers and those that were engaging as stakeholders in their projects. And naturally, we didn't just do interviews, we made those occasions into something of an experience in their own right. And Cece was the interviewer in all occasions. As you can see, Tim, bottom right here, wearing one of Cece's hats. We made them all very interesting and relaxed occasions where people could really get into the spirit of the programme and talk very freely about how the programme is impacting upon them holistically as human beings, And as I said previously, one of the key things coming out of all of this concept of serious fun. And so action research, academic research, it can get a little bit dense and difficult, and sometimes the theories get in the way of the practice, but that spirit of serious fun came out of exploring the relationship between art, education and business. And there's much more work to be done to stimulate that relationship. So I think that's probably where we're at.
How different do you think this is to, say, an art college approach? Do you think art colleges or arts faculties and universities are doing anything like this? Or do you have to be in an art college to take this playful approach?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm lucky I've been to an art college. I was at Central St Martin's for 2 years, which does have a reputation for doing things a little bit different. And I was inspired by the approach taken there. So a lot of the underlying thinking, the approach to how people were exposed to new ideas and new practices, that was driven by an art school approach. When I first got together with Phil Jones, he said, let's create an art college-like environment. So for me, that was like, great, let's do it.
So who are the kind of theorists behind that? Is that, to a certain extent, a lot of what you're talking about sounds a bit like the ideology that goes back to the 1960s.
It does, absolutely.
People like John Berger and ways of seeing.
Absolutely. And Joseph Beuys, the whole sort of approach of taking, some ideas and trying to provide access to them in new ways. I think, we were quite keen to learn from those that had also succeeded more recently in commercial environments as well. So the institution in Brighton that has been pioneering access to the music industry, BIM, now the British and Irish Modern Music Institute. It's a relatively young institution, but it was very inspirational for us to meet Mark Owen and to hear about how BIM had been set up for musicians, by musicians, and some of the theoretical concepts, Bourdieu and Habitus and the becoming of a musician, the becoming of a creative entrepreneur, of becoming an innovator. Those are the sort of questions that I was interested in during the course of the programme.
Cool. So I'm just going to cut into shot for a second and just ask you a few more closer questions,
sure.
Jim. So, is it particular to Brighton? Did it work well because you were in a digital cluster, do you think?
I think that's the backdrop, and New England House provides a different sort of framing of the coming together of the artists, the technologists, and the space was massively important. But I think the timing as well was massively important. The time of year was a challenge.
What do you mean by timing? Do you mean the length of the duration of the project?
The duration.
Or do you mean the time when actually, just after the Fuse report, the digital cluster in Brighton is really very exciting and it's very fertile and it's growing, and so you can do something like this in that place anyway?
Absolutely.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean both of those things. The momentum that we built up with the Fuse research, we needed to put it to use. That was the thing I was interested in, is turning that research evidence base, if you like, into something practical and seeing what we can grow from the ground up, but also from the top down in lots of other ways, obviously being part of bigger, broader projects going on. So timing also very important from the point of view of how to work with time. We ran a pilot for a month, and I think we learned an awful lot from that, but it wasn't long enough for people to reflect on how to develop their ideas for a number of the participants. Others, it was absolutely perfect and just what they needed at that time.
So actually, Fusebox 24 just ran for a month?
No, sorry, Fusebox 24 ran for 24 weeks.
24 weeks.
With 24/7 access to the space. That was the proposition we put out, very simple, straightforward. We ran a project the previous summer in, I think, August 2013 for 1 month. And that was called the Fusebox AMP. And that gave us insight into how to bring people together, how to work with a group in the space. And we learned an awful lot about how to get people to work together, but also how to get ideas to a certain stage. So the reason we went for 24 weeks was that we felt that some ideas needed more time and they needed more exposure and more testing. And we were just keen to experiment with something that wasn't then directly in competition with a university course, for example.
So do people have to come into a project like this with an idea quite well formed already? Or do you think
I think it's a good question. Like I said, we were focused on the innovator rather than the innovation as such, and so we were more concerned that somebody arrived with an idea that they were willing to put to test. So we weren't really concerned whether it had been around for 5 years or 5 years that had led to it arriving in a certain defined state or not, because some of the ideas had never seen the light of day, but they'd been kicking around for 5 years in the minds of some people. But other ideas had actually been out in the market for a while, but they needed a radical shift into another direction. So it was all about the person and whether or not they were going to be able to move that idea forwards and move themselves forwards as a consequence.
Do people have, in my experience working for the Arts Council and reading funding applications, I talk to a lot of people about their ideas, and it does seem sometimes that people carry an idea around with them, as you said, for a long time. Is that dangerous? Should people have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 ideas that they're boiling up?
It's a really interesting question. We had a few people on the programme who did come with more than one idea, and sometimes I think that being in an environment with a group of other people some of whom are really focused on an idea, it helps people work out the clarity that's required to just run with an idea or to put an idea to test and allow it to fall by the wayside. And bringing people in who were actually at different stages at the outset seemed like quite a complicated, risky thing to do, but the feedback we got was that it was really interesting for some of them to see that, and they would say it quite openly, oh, so-and-so's 6 months ahead of me. And I, we thought, how do you know that? And I would ask them, so how can you tell, And they would say, well, I was at the stage because I was talking to them, and they told me that they were at the stage I was at. And so they were very, very open with each other about their progress.
So peer-to-peer.
The peer-to-peer basis of it was
in a programme like this.
Absolutely, and the collaborative dimension was really what I was blown away by how much progress they made together. And I used the phrase a team of companies, and that really excited me because I think that's a very different Brighton approach.
A couple more questions, and then we're going to go to a film, and then we're going to go to Sophie. Who was missing? What element was missing, maybe, from FuseBox 24 in this element, this phase of activity? What do you feel you could have benefited from in terms of influence or skills or practice?
More women.
How would you achieve that?
It's a really interesting observation. I've just come to this conclusion at the end of it. It was like, God, we've got to work this out so that we've got more diversity, because what did work really, really well were sessions and activities where we had the diversity really revealing itself, and there was quite a lot of pressure from the women in the programme at the early stages to bring in more women outsiders to give the diversity another sort of layer of richness, I suppose. And there was nothing about being tokenistic and trying to do things in a balanced way for the sake of it. It was, there were times where certain influences were possibly stronger than others, and so
diversity is an essential requirement of any kind of cultural team or any kind of ideas camp situation like this.
I think so. The more rich and diverse, the better.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about this taking place in Brighton, but how would you approach this if you were to do something like this in, outside a digital cluster? Could you do it somewhere rural? Could you do it somewhere where there isn't a digital cluster? And how would you do that?
Personally, I think you can, and I would love to try that, because excuse me, I think that what we established was a very, very clear focus on how innovators are made. That was the overarching research question we worked to. How are innovators made? And that was really about trying to work out what conditions were required. And so I think with an appropriate space, and the space is key, some very, very simple tools like the whiteboards on wheels and you don't need furniture as such, but enough space for people to be able to set out in a way that works for them. You can bring people together and you can try some of the tools we use as ways of getting ideas out, articulating them, challenging them, taking them outside. This doesn't require a great deal of tech, for example. So if you haven't got a whole load of programmers, for example, in the community, well, we didn't really need a great deal of tech to make this happen. The people that needed tech went and found it, or there were some tech skills in the group and people were quite happy to share. So yeah, I think that's the most important thing, is setting the tone so that people will share and reveal what they need.
And access, I guess, to some skills or some mentors around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mentors can be brought in, can't they?
Absolutely. We learned a lot from the AMP experience, the pilot, where we brought in a lot of mentors for that program. For this program, we didn't bring in loads and loads of mentors. We brought in a few people that we thought were, well, the feedback showed that they were really valued because of their approach, and we invited them to come back more than once. And we figured that actually over the course of 24 weeks, people are going to work out who they need as a mentor and what stage they're going to really need mentoring. And so, yeah, I think mentors are a very important part of this process, but the relationship between people mentoring, I'm more interested in the process of mentoring than who acts as the mentor with what level of experience or expertise, because people in the group mentored each other in very interesting ways.
So perhaps you don't necessarily need a mentor with skills, you need a catalyst, a network catalyst in the group.
Absolutely, I think you need that as well. Some people were very, very keen to try and find a person who'd done a very specific thing at first, and then we would discover that actually what they really needed was a range of different experiences and people to talk to. So providing opportunities to interface with other people, very important. So again, I'll just come back to the diversity point, really. Okay.
And the diversity question, actually, I had in my mind just then as well, is what kind of age range are we talking about here? And is there it being Brighton, whether you're all young hipsters, if you did it outside of Brighton, would it be a different age range?
I mean, naturally, as a researcher, I captured all this. The age range was 24 to 55, and the average age was 31, I think. So we're not talking people straight out of college. I think we only had one person straight out of college.
Right, cool.
Yeah, it was a pretty broad mix, and as I said, it was overwhelmingly male, 11 to 3, I think.
Right.
So I think if we could encourage more women into these sorts of programs, even better.
It's really interesting to just finishing off now, the Fuse freelancer report also discovered that women freelancers in creative media and creative industries are predominantly getting lower rates or asking for lower freelance rates than men in creative industries. Got any views on that, having seen the mix of people attracted to Fusebox 24?
No, that's a political question.
It's not. I mean, it's difficult.
It's a difficult question.
Would it mean that you need to orientate the programme more slightly differently if you were to do it again to make sure that you get that diversity in terms of gender? Possibly.
I think there's also a role, an outreach role, as in just actively going and taking this programme to, well, the likes of the events that have been running this month in Brighton, with a strong focus on getting women into the sector. I think it's just very important to try and broaden access in general terms, but I think it also starts with younger ages as well. I'm personally very interested in the idea of trying to take these sorts of approaches into schools at a very young age to try and stimulate getting young girls interested in creative entrepreneurial programs as much as young boys. It's a long-term challenge.
Because the business studies curriculum in schools and design and technology curriculum in schools hasn't been modified or developed or upgraded in the way that computing science has been upgraded, has it? So there's a generation, a much younger generation of entrepreneurs coming out now.
Absolutely, and that I think we've had conversations about this with Minecraft, and my daughters are into Minecraft, and it's one of those rare. It's not rare. It's one of those areas where there's possible ways of converging different subject areas. If that can happen in schools, brilliant. That's what we should be encouraging.
Right, let's round up now. We need to run a film now, which is a film showing the activity from Fusebox 24. While that film is running, we're going to change over and we're going to welcome Sophie Giblin to the seat. So, I'm not quite sure how we roll the film. Is that something you do?
I'm not sure either. Fusebox 24 is 24 weeks of business support for innovators. As researcher in residence, I was here to design the programme, The Outset, which I did as a collaboration with Phil Jones from Wired Sussex, with Cece Blumstein, the artist in practice here, and with Professor Gillian Youngs from the University of Brighton.
It's about learning by doing. We're very clear that it's about getting support from practitioners in the real world, experts in the real world, and it's about peer-to-peer support, people helping each other. So those elements of art and design, plus the elements from lean startup models that we've brought together, really makes our model unique.
My role has been to ensure that there's a pervading culture of innovation and creativity kept alive.
Research was integral to all elements of Fusebox 24 through the planning, the design and the implementation, as well as the research on the participants' experience of the programme, which forms the basis of the report.
The people on the programme developed in lots of ways over the 24 weeks. We forced them from the outset to really challenge themselves and to share with the group what it was that they faced as challenges. They really supported each other, and as a consequence I think they've all come out of it as more resilient individuals, and their companies have got a better chance of surviving.
Fusebox 24 enabled us to connect with lots of fantastic people who were not only the course leaders but actually out there in the Brighton scene. It's also provided a space, and space is at a massive premium in this town especially, and having somewhere that you can go 24/7 to put your head down and work in a light, airy and productive place is absolutely amazing. The art and design element of the Fusebox 24 was incredibly important. You can't have innovation without creativity.
The Fusebox programmes helped the business tremendously, because about halfway through the programme I decided to turn down 2 briefs to focus on some opportunities that I thought were kind of closer to my innovative purpose and actually kind of creating things that were more meaningful for me and will actually help the business grow quicker.
The big takeaway is the peer support that we got from it and being able just to rely on each other.
For me it was just amazing to find this startup business programme with that focus on art and that respect and value for the arts, and to find this community of people who were making and inventing.
It's done exactly what I needed, which was to turn me from a kind of like a dreamer, inventor, pie in the sky kind of guy into an actual in the world making something real happen.
Being part of the Fusebox for the first 6 months of our life cycle has definitely had profound impact on who we are.
The programme's added value to Good Money by allowing us the time and the space and the support to kind of really explore what it is as a proposition.
I do actually believe that the business is going to be more financially successful and sustainable, a lot more fulfilling, a lot more purposeful, and it'll have a lot greater societal impact.
It's the best thing that's happened to the company so far.
Fusebox 24 is a game changer for the role of research in innovation in the digital economy.
We do see this as a standard bearer for a new model of supporting businesses.
Hi there, we're back after that film, back Fusebox 24. We've got Sophie Giblin here. Sophie is an award-winning entrepreneur, artist, runs Collective Gallery in Brighton. Really interesting pop-up space, but she's done a whole load of other stuff. Sophie talked at our Ideas Camp in Sittingbourne last weekend and followed Jim and was really, really inspiring. I want to hand over to Sophie. Sophie's going to talk about what she's been doing to get up to this point. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk today for 20 minutes or so. It's going to be the story of how I started Collective immediately after I finished my degree in 2013. But yeah, send in some tweets if you want to ask questions. So Collective Gallery is now an award-winning gallery, and it's aimed at early career practitioners and artists and creatives. And it's all about inspiring entrepreneurship, looking at resourcefulness and working with collaborative skills as well. And so a little bit of background. I moved to Brighton in 2010 to start my art degree, and this is a piece of artwork that I did just to give you a bit of context about me. I basically drew lines for an entire year as a form of meditation and looked at discipline and repetition. And this is a piece of artwork where I drew lines onto a 20-meter roll of tracing paper, which really transformed me and my concentration, and it was really interesting. And then I wrote a book about it. Anyway, immediately after university, I saw that there was this huge problem. A lot of my friends who got really great results were basically not going into creative job roles. And the people who did go into creative job roles were being overworked and really badly underpaid. And I was one of those creatives as well. And I soon realized that the reason this was happening was because we had no business sense whatsoever. So in the space between finishing my degree and getting my results, that strange limbo time at the beginning of the summer, I went to Central St. Martin's and did a short course called Entrepreneurship for Creatives, which was 1 week long, and it was a slap in the face. It taught me all about contracts, intellectual property, professionalism, the things that weren't really taught in the kind of 7 years of higher education that I did in the creative industry and in my university degree. And after this course, which was really, really great, by the way, I would totally recommend it, I had this amazing moment where I woke up and said to my boyfriend, I think I'm going to open an art gallery, and it's going to be for me and for my friends, and we're going to learn how to be professional, and we're going to do it on our own terms, rather than be in this strange environment with these strange vultures coming in and giving us loads of work and making us work for nothing. We're going to learn about that, but on our own terms. So I said this to Luke, my boyfriend, and he looked down at me and said, that's a really good idea. You should definitely open an art gallery. And I was like, what? Okay. So I went onto Google immediately, and I typed into Google how to open a pop-up gallery in Brighton. And I basically remembered a lecture that a friend of mine had gone to by this guy called Dan Thompson. He came into the university and he told everybody about pop-up spaces, that there's loads of empty, vacant spaces all around the city that's destroying the economy. But creative people, business people, should go in and prototype their ideas in these spaces, rejuvenate the city, and have an idea and put it into a physical space just for a short amount of time. I didn't go to that lecture, but I remembered it. When I did my Google search, lo and behold, Dan Thompson's book came up, How to Open a Pop-Up Business for Dummies. I bought the book immediately, it arrived, and I've written the word risk here because, as a good mentor of mine has told me, every project, every idea starts with a risk, but it's not until every project, every idea starts with a set of needs, but it's not until the first risk is taken that your project really begins. And this is a really interesting idea, because if you can remember the first risk 15 years down the line when you have a business, you'll always be able to remember what needs you were setting out to achieve. And for me, this was the first risk, tweeting Dan Thompson, Dan, are you there? Are you listening? And saying, if this works, can we go for coffee? Which took me about half an hour to draft. Anyway, it was really interesting. Do you have a question?
I got a quick question.
Yes.
Is that a bit like the thing that Jim was talking about with Fusebox 24? Is that a bit like when they were doing their 6-word pitches? Because it's like, that seems like a real risk too. So
Yeah, definitely. Or the idea that you have a tweet to say something really important to someone.
What's your first risk?
That is my first risk, being able to articulate the very beginning project that I didn't even know what it was. Yeah, it's just the same as that. Anyway, I tweeted Dan Thompson, and he was so kind and became like an online mentor to me. But then, after I read the book, which was great, and it taught me about pop-up spaces, I decided I needed to speak to some real people. So I went to the council, and I met Branwen Lorrigan, who became a great mentor for me. I sat down with her and said, here's my idea. And she said, this is all very good and well, but you shouldn't be speaking to me. You should be speaking to the guy at the end of the table who happened to be in the cafe at the same time, Tom Nixon, who would be my to-be mentor. So she kind of shuffled me over to Tom and said, you need to speak to this girl. So I had coffee with Tom, and the first question he asked me was, when do you want to open your gallery? And I said, in a year's time, I'm going to open my first gallery, because I'm going to know what I'm doing. I would have had the research and the funding. It's going to be great. And he said, you're stuck in this academic mentality where you think things take a year, but they don't. You need to begin your project immediately. And that scared me. But I took his advice. In fact, I pretty much take advice from any mentor. It's so valuable. One of the first things he told me to do was go to the Wild School, which was a prototype for a new radical community school, where you go in order to learn. But in order to learn, you should teach, which I didn't know when I arrived that first day, and ended up, after an amazing poetry class, teaching 5 experimental humming courses to children and businessmen. And the music that we created would then go online and on the radio. It was one of those spaces where anything could happen. And it was really inspiring, this beautiful community of people. Another great thing that Tom asked me to do was to physicalize my project, take it out of the fake, the kind of in your mind world, and bring it into the real world, make it physical somehow. And I didn't know how to do this at first, but then I created a workshop, which was, I didn't realize, the 3-hour version of the 3-month course that I now offer at Collective. It was called Fast Art. And the idea is to get a group of people together, everyone puts £1 down in the middle of the table, and you come up with an idea. And then you spend your tiny budget, £7 or £10, making your idea a reality. And you go out into the streets and you exhibit your idea, and then you have to sell it as well. And this all happens in 3 hours. It's all about idea generation, collaboration, resourcefulness, risk-taking, and selling. And it's really interesting. The first time we did it, it was awful, but we had an amazing product. When we went out onto the streets, we pretended to be opticians. And we made these cardboard glasses. We'd go out onto the street and say, you there, can you read our letter? You know, one of those letter tables that you have to read in the eye test. And we put a piece of tracing paper up in front of it. And they'd come come over and say, no, I can't read such a thing. And we would offer them our glasses and say, oh, why don't you try these on? They'd put on the glasses and we'd remove the tracing paper, and lo and behold, they could see the letters. And people would pay us, you know, £2 to £5 for a go. And it was really interactive. And we learnt so much from that experience. I've taught that with businessmen and women. I've taught it with children in schools who are in year 9. I've taught it to elderly women in Bexhill. And it's amazing for them, and it's also amazing for me every time that I do it. It's incredible. So luckily, Tom encouraged me to take my idea and make it physical, because this is one of my main sources of income now as well. Anyway, so I went back to Tom. This is very early in that summer of 2013, after doing Fast Art and after seeing Charlie and seeing all these other people he told me to see. I went back to Tom and said, this is what I've been up to. And he was very impressed and said, come onto my course. So I did the Fusebox amp, which is what Jim was talking about, but the prototype version of it, which lasted for 1 month, which took me up until the end of summer. And there were 7 little startups, and I was one of them. And I think I was the youngest one. I was the only one who had just come out of university and really fired up and ready to go. We had like 25 different mentors from YouTube and Brandwatch, but there were mentors who also had a kind of therapy background. And they weren't just there to tell you about how to make profit, but more about how to problem solve, which I found really incredible and still inspires me today. On the last day of this course, one of my mentors said to me, Christmas is coming. You should begin your pop-up gallery immediately. And I was like, oh God, that gives me, what, 3 months to come up with the money, to find a space, to get the artists together, to actually put this thing together that I've been working on for the last 3-4 months? Yes, that's what I did. So I needed some money. I did not know how to write an Arts Council application. I'm dyslexic. The whole thing freaked me out. I didn't have time either. One of the artists I took on board, by the way, taking on artists was totally easy because there's a lot of artists and illustrators, especially in Brighton, who are sick and tired of working for nothing, making posters for band nights, working in cafes and retail. It was easy to get the artists. It was basically my friends. I rounded up 21 artists and illustrators, creatives, in a week pretty much. One of the artists said, we should do a crowdfunding campaign. And the crowdfunding campaign was on Kickstarter. It was amazing. I looked at Kickstarter's interface, instantly loved it. There's a few different types of crowdfunding out there. There's Indiegogo and there's Kickstarter. For me, Kickstarter was more interesting because you set yourself a target, £3,000. You give yourself a time limit to get to that £3,000, 30 days. And if you don't reach your target in the set amount of days that you give yourself, you can't keep any of the money. And it creates this urgency. And it also creates ownership for all of the artists because everybody's in this together. Everybody's working so hard. It's not just one person sat in a room writing an application and dealing with all the problems. Everybody has to do it together.
So you reckon that rather than Indiegogo, because with Indiegogo you get the money anyway, don't you?
No matter what, even if you only make 1/4 or £1 of the money you were trying to make with Indiegogo, you will receive the money. I prefer Kickstarter because it's like a badge of honor. If you can get the people to like your idea and you translate it and you articulate it correctly, you're probably going to get the money. And this is something you can wear forever, this badge of honor.
So did you have the whole kind of series of incentives and prizes and stuff like that to get to your targets?
We decided on our Kickstarter, because there were 20 artists, 21 including me, everybody would donate a piece of artwork. And then the Kickstarter, the money that we would raise would pay for the prints and pay for the printing and pay for it to be delivered to people's doors. That was what we offered, our artwork for your money. Most of the people who donated money didn't need an incentive. They chose not to have an incentive because they didn't want us to spend any of the money that we'd been given. It was amazing. So this was our first Kickstarter campaign. We raised 50% of the money in the first 24 hours, and then 2 weeks later we did a publicity stunt, or a public intervention, where we went into a very famous cafe in Brighton called the Marwood, and for one night only, you could have any scuzzy animal of your choice painted onto the Marwood Cafe's wall. The idea was you would go on to Kickstarter, you say what animal you want, what name you want with it, how much you're going to pay, you pay, and then you go over to our website and you watch a live stream of us painting. That night we got all the money that we needed. It always helps to do a public intervention 2 weeks or halfway through your campaign. Anyway, it was a success. We got the money that we needed. And we got ready for our space. Now, finding a space was actually very difficult. We needed an empty high street shop, and it was such a tease because there's empty high street shops everywhere. But getting inside was a different story altogether. And at the time, We Are Pop-Up, who are an amazing agency who help you find spaces, weren't really on the scene at that time. So I had to do it on my own. I was literally knocking on empty high street shop windows, hoping that someone would come to the door. I got a little crazy at that time. And I was really worried, and I was saying to one of the last artists on board, this might not happen. This might not happen in an empty space. It might happen in a cafe, and I know that's not really what we're trying to achieve. And that girl, River Jade, said to me, I know someone who's got a space. And I said, oh my God, are you kidding me? Show me this space. And we had a look. She showed me an empty butchery on St. James's Street in Brighton, and there was stuff everywhere. There was mold on the walls. I'm sure there's asbestos downstairs. The smell was disgusting. I walked in, I looked at it, and I was like, it's beautiful. And then we completely transformed the space. 21 of us all together. It didn't take that long to rejuvenate the space. You know, we got rid of all the mold in between all of these tiles. We completely rejuvenated it. We moved in, we problem solved, and we just did it together. It was really fun. It took about a week for us to transform the space. And this is what it ended up looking like. The rent was £1,500, including business rates, for 6 weeks and 1 day. If you rent a space for 6 weeks and 1 day, it means that the landlord doesn't have to pay business rates for 3 months afterwards, and that was the hook that I used. Luckily for me, the landlord was also like a patron of the arts. He was really supportive of us. So this is what it looked like, Sussex local produce. Which was so fitting, because we are the Sussex local produce. We did murals in the windows. Here are a couple of photographs inside. So of course it was quite difficult. We had tiles, how we were going to hang our artwork. We decided to use our carpentry skills and put up a kind of wooden frame, and then put our artwork onto hooks onto these wooden frames. We did all sorts of things in this space. Taking from the Wild School, this very incredible school, the prototype for the community school I talked about earlier, I encouraged all of the artists to teach one workshop. That's all they had to do. And this was actually quite scary for a lot of people who had never taught before, but it was so good for them to share their skills and to test out their knowledge on people who maybe didn't know anything about what they were teaching. People would come into the street, from the street, so it was amazing for our footfall as well, offering these free incentives, free workshops. Of course, I would pay for all of the bits and bobs. The artists didn't have to pay for that. This was Drinky Doodle, of course. So the idea is to have a drink and then you doodle on the walls. It was extremely fun. Okay, so there was an amazing day where I got 2 incredible emails. And the first email was from Be Purple, the enterprise department of the university, saying, "We'd like to give you some money to open your next gallery." And I was like, yeah! And then the second email was a personal email from Caroline Lucas, Brighton's Green MP. And she wrote to me saying, "You're up to. I'd like to put you forward for an award." And I said, "Oh my God, who's playing a prank on me?" And no one was playing a prank on me. It was Caroline. And so in 2014, I held the position Most Outstanding Social Entrepreneur of the Southeast. And I national finalist, but I didn't win because the person who did win was actually saving lives, and it was awesome. But it was a real honor to be given that award, and it really motivated me to do my next gallery as well. So I set up my next gallery, new artists this time, with a little bit more money as well because of the university. We did another crowdfunding campaign, and it was to teach those artists how to do a crowdfunding campaign. In this day and age, funding is being cut. You need to think more creatively about how to get your funds, think more entrepreneurially, and crowdfunding is a perfect platform to test out those ideas. So this was it. I called the project Death by Gallery because the first gallery almost killed me, but in a good way. So Death by Gallery, we raised £2,300. We made this campaign 2 weeks instead of 1 month long. Because we did the last campaign in 2 weeks, we thought, oh, we should test our skills, try and squeeze it in. In the first 24 hours, we received 50% of the money again, and 2 weeks later, we got all the money. And we moved in. I don't know if you can see this photo, it's quite dark, but we moved into a space with the help of We Are Pop-Up, who are part of Recreate. They were amazing. They just sorted all of that out for us. The price was quite similar. It was about £1,500. And it was in Brighton Square. It was a particularly ugly space in a strange little square, and it was great. Yeah, we went in and we transformed the walls. No space is too ruined for us. We can always transform a space. And this is how we transformed it. We had sculpture, we had illustration, we had interactive elements and fine art and painting. It was really exciting. And again, all of the artists taught a workshop as well. We put on music. This was in May, so it was part of the Great Escape as well. So we invited bands to come and play, which really packed out the space. Actually, it was quite good. And now I can't stop. It is like an addiction. Having supported so many artists, they then tell their friends, and they tell their friends, and suddenly we have this incredible community of illustrators and creatives, painters, sculptors. There's so many different types of creators in our community, and we're so open to accepting more. One of the most amazing things that we found is that some of the artists have gone on to start their own ventures, started doing their own crowdfunding campaigns, started to open their own galleries. It's incredible to see this, and I think it's about confidence and seeing that you have support from your peers. We have Facebook groups where we can problem solve together. We put on events where we can meet up and discuss, because outside of university it's difficult to have creative crit groups, where you critique your work or your ideas. But you can do that on your own outside. Anyway, now I'm at this interesting stage where I talked about risks and needs earlier. I believe that what I set out to achieve, which was to stay with my friends a little bit longer after university and learn about professionalism, I believe those needs have been met, which creates this wonderful headspace, and a new set of needs have arisen. And the new needs are about, I guess, about kind of international collaboration and looking at the globe as one whole venture. Trying not to just think about myself and Brighton, but think outside, not just the UK, but outside in a global way. Because of this, I've decided to wrap up the galleries. So I've created a manual basically, which is coming out in about a month's time. Everything that I've learned, you can learn as well, for free on our website. So in a month's time, go back to collectivegallery.com and you can have all of this information in a step-by-step guide. Because of these new needs that have arisen, I've started a new project called Nice to Meet You, which I've been formulating here in Lighthouse actually. Nice to Meet You is a global online community platform which introduces UK artists to other creatives across the globe, but in the form of visual dialogues. In Collective, I ask artists 10 questions and they reply visually. But I think it's more exciting if you get 2 artists from 2 different locations asking each other a question and then replying visually. So here's some examples. This is an artist from Germany, but Harry Mills from the UK asked the question, if you could ask one question to someone living on the other side of the world, what would it be? And this is how Ed in Germany replied. And then Ed in Germany asked the question, if you could live anywhere, ... And Harry Mills replied this. So these visual dialogues can show differences. So yeah, it's kind of a pairing of those 2 things.
I have another question as well. It was something you mentioned really early about early career artists you're working with. Is that just young people out of college, or what about people that come to art later in life?
Yeah, early career doesn't mean young. We made that mistake. We said young at one point, but it wasn't true because some of the artists who've come on board Collective are in their 40s. So it's really anybody who feels that they need that support. Early career, it's kind of a loose term because we don't put a time limit on it. We don't say if you've been out of university for 3 years or less. It's really anybody who just wants to be part of that community. So, but it is early career because we want to help support the people who come straight out of university and college. But also, we're not so keen on saying that it's just people who've been in education, because personally, I don't think that art college is necessary anymore. So there's quite a few people who've come and just, they've been practitioners without having the education, and they've been involved as well.
Let's just jump on that point. So you don't think art college is necessary anymore. I understand what you mean, but could you say a bit more about what you meant?
Yeah. I did art college and I loved it, and it was perfect for me because I really like group interaction and skill swapping and having a mentor like there all the time. It was perfect for me, but actually there's so many practitioners that I know who've been able to learn on their own and didn't necessarily need to spend all that money to be in a creative environment. Especially in Brighton, there really is so much that you can get involved with. Maybe people who've been in university, just creating a very similar environment for people who haven't been in university to get involved with. Especially if you want to be more of a digital artist as well. Anyone can learn how to code. You just have to type it into Google and then get involved with the community. I think it's great. You know, you can read any book you like or learn anything from Google. You don't necessarily need the qualification anymore, I don't think.
So is there we are talking at the moment in various places about what kind of different options there might be in terms of educating yourself in a networked environment, and the kind of open source environment that you're talking about. But what if you were in Sittingbourne? What if you're in Canterbury? What if you're in somewhere where there isn't a digital cluster? We're lucky being here. And I think it's easy for us to say we don't need an art college, but if you're somewhere where there isn't a digital cluster, what do you do?
I think you begin one. I think it's something that I've become quite fond of because I support so many artists who have said at some point there isn't this or there isn't that community, and I say, well, begin. You start it. You make it happen. Start with any idea. Use what you have around you and just begin your project, whatever it is. And it doesn't need to be this marvelous, spectacular, really expensive thing. that first fast art that I did was just a bunch of hungover people just trying to create together. And just by practicing, it's turned into this wonderful community that we've been teaching it all over the country. So I think it's okay to just sit in a cafe with your friends and just talk, because that's the beginning of an amazing project and a community. Yeah.
So the community supports. Is there a question about quality? Does quality matter, and where does quality come into this?
Quality.
Is it relevant?
I think quality is really important, but quality comes from practice and sharing and evolving and being really open to change in a disruptive environment. Be open to criticism so that you can constantly learn and develop, and always try to be like the best that you possibly can, I think quality is so important. But of course, these early career artists and me, we're at the very beginning stages of our career. So the quality of maybe my courses is not like 100% perfect, but everybody knows that, and we're all learning together. And I think it's allowed to be, in that kind of very scary beginning stages. I think we are always striving for quality. I think that's what we always have in mind, but maybe it's not perfect yet, and we're okay with that. I guess that's the idea about open source as well.
Yeah.
When something's open source, everyone contributes to make it better, so it's all right.
So this is all about participation, really.
Yeah, it's really
More
important.
to be in it than to try and own it or
Yeah.
lead it. I'm interested in those two concepts, like ownership and leadership, in all of this, because this is your project in a lot of ways, but from the way you describe it, it sounds like it's very much open to everyone who's involved in it to own it.
Yeah.
So do you have, just being really, really practical for a minute, do you have a company, or how do you actually administer all this?
It's a limited company by guarantee, and it has been for about a year.
Can you come sit here?
Come on in. I am the director.
Yep.
So I am the curator of ideas. Of course, if you're wanting to be part of Collective, you would come into our community, and you would probably start in a few different ways. So with a picture interview, if you're an artist, you would be asked 10 questions by me, and you reply visually. That starts the process. And then you come and get involved with our exhibitions. Then you start to teach with us. So there's like a process. It's a very loose process.
Yeah.
But if you want to bring new ideas, like I'm here helping, I'm ready to help in any way, and like link people together as well.
Yeah.
So it's not like a franchise where you can take a bit of Collective and start it somewhere else. You just come in and work with us, I guess.
Yeah. And do you see that same principle applying with the new project? Is that really how you've taken that leap to internationalise? Because that's quite a big...
It is a big leap.
Big leap.
So the reason I'm doing Nice to Meet You is because I'm moving to New Zealand, and I wanted to create a project that was going to help me whilst I travel. So I want to help UK artists speak to artists across the world, but I want to do it whilst I'm in these different countries. So it will still be it'll be part of Collective. This umbrella of Collective will hold Nice to Meet You inside it. I'll still be the director and kind of curating it, but open to so many other people's contributions along the way.
That's interesting. So will you leave Collective here in a particular state and allow it to grow in its own ways, or?
Yeah, possibly. So we're not quite at that stage, but this is why I created the manual, which is a step-by-step process of exactly everything I did with a pop-up gallery, with crowdfunding, with connecting with the community. That's going to be left online. So not necessarily for the UK, but for anybody to learn from it. It's funny because I've spoken to a lot of people who are quite traditional in the business sense, who would say that's a terrible idea because you're creating competition. Whereas I think if you teach everybody else how to do this, you're creating this wonderful cluster of people who are all working towards the same problem to solve it, and actually makes a stronger bond altogether.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're creating a market, really, aren't you? And you're creating a community at the same time, and everybody's got to gain from there being a shared understanding of how to be generous and gain by going through a process that's common.
Yeah, I think things have changed because of the internet, because things are open source. People are sharing their ideas, not holding them in and then trying to sell them off piece by piece. I think it's it's quite an interesting and scary idea, and you have to think more creatively about how you're making money. But I think it's so important to share what you have. And I would, I go to so many talks by other creatives to be inspired by them. Ideas that I would also use in collective. We have this mutual understanding where we're not stealing, we're just blending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why New Zealand?
I don't know really. It's probably Branwen. Branwen, one of my mentors from Brighton and Hove Council, she lived there for a really long time, and it's just been, the Commonwealth is something that I've wanted to travel around for a while, because I'm in the UK, I can have a visa with that, being able to travel before I'm 30, so it's kind of using that and pouncing on that and learning from those other environments where they speak English.
A couple of questions then. Going back to the art college thing, what could art colleges or further education do to do more in this environment? I mean, a short while ago you said something about students and maybe art colleges are irrelevant now or can't play into this space. What could art colleges do? And this is a question to both of you, to play better in this innovation space.
Personally, for me, because I just come out of university, I can really see that we were inside a bubble and we were not connecting with the community. And that's not to say University of Brighton was a bad university. I loved it, but I can see the faults. If I was to do it again, or if I was to help change that course, I would put in real life situations where you're connecting with the community, you're doing real life commissions, you're trying to problem solve, and so you don't end your degree and then think, well, how am I going to use these skills in the real world? I think that idea of real world and fake inside university world, that needs to change. When you're in university, you should be practicing real life skills. And so I would suggest maybe getting me in, no, I'm kidding, just have more of a creative problem solving mindset. So actually do an arts council bid, actually do a crowdfunding campaign, actually put on an exhibition or a pop-up space. I know lots of people are already doing that, but more of that.
I think Sophie's absolutely right, and I would go further and say that what we think of as undergraduate programs now should be incubators for innovators, and postgraduate programs should be the equivalent of accelerators for individuals and startups.
Do you think that means that could students in the future design their own courses, maybe? Is that
you can. Yeah, you can in some institutions already. I know Ravensbourne's very flexible in that approach, and others, I did a lot of research around this prior to the Fusebox AMP, and the way that got flavoured was learnings from places like D School at Stanford, where the emphasis is all about people coming together with real world problems, bringing executives in from big corporations, but allowing the students to come and attend classes to learn about things in much the way that Sophie's talking about, the sharing of expertise. It doesn't really matter who the teacher is. It's almost like we need to cut through those sort of hierarchical status issues and so on, and it's like everyone can learn from each other. It's really the principle at play, and doing that in ways that challenge the notion that you've got to have a badge from a certain institution to have credibility. I think from what I hear from Sophie, I agree as well. It's we sort of past that. The experience of being in a certain environment is very important, but it's not about whether it's an MA or a PG this or whatever else. It doesn't really matter quite so much. It is really more about can we create experiences that bond people together in such ways that they will take commercial risks and fund projects in ways that we haven't thought of yet. It feels like we just started that process, and I think Sophie's story is a fantastic one for how to do the crowdfunding with stunts and so on. It's all of that is like, my God, it's not just can you do crowdfunding, it's like what way to do the crowdfunding. There's all these layers of learning which the theory of 3 years undergraduate and then doing a postgraduate and so on. It's like the world will have moved on so much by the time we get to the end of all this. We've got to cook it in from the outset.
It's funny.
So, can I just ask, following that up, is there an ideal length of time? I mean, that you should do this kind of activity. So, for example, you go to college for 3 years to art college to do a BA in fine art or whatever. 3 years. Should we be doing 3 years at art college? Should we be doing 1 year at art college and 1 year in industry, or 1 year trying to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I feel maybe not every single art student will want to be an entrepreneur. You know, it's not always about profit, but having a creative entrepreneurial mindset isn't necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, I think it would be good to have a year maybe in a studio where you're very playful and creating and really just getting to know yourself and your own ideas, but then using those ideas in a really physical, real space, whatever. I don't want this real fake thing. It should all be real. But I think maybe a couple of years, 4 years is fine, and it doesn't have to be for a year at a time like I was taught. You know, these projects can be so much shorter. You know, interjecting real life skills and opportunities into the safe educational course is quite a good thing, that structure.
Yeah, some places, do it in different ways. Hyper Island model is an interesting one, blending, really practical industry roles and the learning required to perform them in a very interesting way, via short courses, longer courses, so on, but making it all very real and related to, the needs of the companies that are sending their people there and so on. I think, there's all sorts of hybrid models to be created. That's the bit that I'm really interested in, coming into this from a commercial, a career of 20 years in commercial, but coming into education now, it's a brilliant time, excuse me, to be challenging and disrupting the way the education system, is formalising the way that people come out. And there's so many other ways we can do this. I think that's the thing. We're just at the start of.
Where did it go? So, I mean, this is interesting in the context of what we're here to talk about. So, idea generation, structures and networking around idea generation, and places that you can do it feasibly and easily. It's not actually about profit or entrepreneurialism, is it? It's also about surviving as a creative and surviving as an artist as well. So I kind of just wanted to pick up on what Sophie pointed out. Yes, it's not about making money, all of this. It's not about entrepreneurialism necessarily. It could be about surviving and sustaining as an artist too.
And feeling fulfilled as well, because if you take an idea and you really pursue it, and you do it with a group of people if you want, it can be one of the most fulfilling things that you do. And then it turns out that your work is the thing that you love. Because I think it's a really interesting thing that after you leave university, you will have to work for the rest of your life, but you might not do it in a way that you want to do it. Maybe you'll be doing it and you regret it at the end of your life. But coming out of university, or just not doing university and creating this thing that's come from your body and your ideas, and you pursue that, it can be one of the most wonderful things. And I'm so happy doing Collective. I don't know, I think people will be doing more freelance work and creating their own businesses to survive, doing short commissions with other people. I think there's going to be less people working for big corporations now.
I think it's absolutely right. There's nothing that's safe anymore. I mean, what profession can you recommend your children go into where you have a job for life? Or you can guarantee that you can just gradually, incrementally go about doing the job as it's always been done and end up at the top of the pile. The world just doesn't work that way.
Not anymore, no.
And the idea, portfolio careers and all that sort of stuff, it feels like it's been talked about for forever now, but it hasn't really in the overall scheme of things. But I think that's why, coming back to the thing I mentioned earlier about skills and approaches earlier in the education journey, it feels to me now that, with the different approaches to coding and stuff in schools, that feels like, right, okay, just about getting these changes, fundamental changes, like you said about open source, absolutely pivotal. That is starting to shift the broader agenda, I think, about changing the way that all of these things existed at the earliest stages of where these things can be reconfigured in new ways. And as John and I were talking about this earlier, if you can redesign business education and design and technology and coding and art, then ideally you would
blend
put
together.
All things together, exactly from the earliest stages.
Well, let's talk a bit about that. I mean, I think that's one direction that skills development in creative industries and that kind of thing it's all becoming a big subject. So what could we, I mean, individually, both of you, first of all, I guess, Jim, what do you think the options are for creative industry skills development? Is it about schools? Is it about colleges? Is it about industry? Is it about placements and volunteering and sandwich courses? What is it? Is it about a new version of a tech college from the 1940s, 50s and 60s? What is it?
I think it's a very big question.
Well, try answering one of those.
Yeah, it's about all of those things set out, I think, as formal institutions and informal institutions. That's what I'm personally interested in, and like Sophie, you know, I've been exposed to the open source community and the evolution of that over the last, well, for me, since about 1999, and I've just seen people develop in entirely new ways. You know, I have genuinely worked on projects where coders were hired through World of Warcraft and they delivered code for government projects that my company was working on, and these people were, I never saw them, but they were perfectly fine with being briefed and doing everything remotely, and this is going for about 15 years. So for me this doesn't feel new. It just feels like the rest of the world is gradually catching up, and that we can trust and do these things online, globally, however it is that people find that they can work together in effective ways. And that's about building new bases of trust. And I think, you know, from the experience I've had working in schools through the previous government's programme Creative Partnerships, I learned a lot about the difficulty that young people had relating to teachers and teachers to young people when it came to technology. And, you know, we've got lots and lots of challenges still about working out how we can use technology in everyday situations, you know, permitting handheld devices in classrooms. I did work on that with digital leaders and so on in schools, and try to work out how you break down these barriers. There are just so many issues, which is why I say there's institutional approaches which will take forever. Universities aren't going to go away, but they will become more relevant because they've got to. And they've got to be more relevant in the way that they allow the informal approaches to emerge. And things like validation and so on are all part of that. But I think really what we can do in the short term is look at the success of projects like Sophie's and really encourage young people in schools to start trying entrepreneurial activity, innovative approach at a much younger age, and building in support for that.
So I just started teaching year 9 art and entrepreneurship, and it's so interesting because I was told that the children, well, they're not children, they're teenagers, they're like 13. They don't see how art is going to benefit them in the future, right? And so the program is called Art at Work, but I've come in and said, I think we shouldn't even use the word art. It's more, how does creativity help your future? So creativity in any sense, in the entrepreneurial sense, you can be creative in anything. And they've really taken on to the whole idea. And I've taught fast art to them, and it was amazing. They loved it. They loved working together in these teams, coming up with these crazy ideas. So they took, like, you know, record sleeves, vinyls, totally re-embellished them, and then sold them all in 20 minutes in their break to all the teachers, and made 90 quid, and they're like, yeah, this is so great, and it's so fun. And it's so interesting that this school has taken on this quite disruptive workshop. I don't think many schools are thinking like that yet, but Backer is quite an entrepreneurship, interesting school.
Tell us where that school is and what that school is, Sophie.
So it's Backer, Brighton Aldridge Community School in Brighton, and they've recently turned into an entrepreneurship school. So I think they're thinking quite radically about teaching the kids about these subject areas. And they got in touch with me recently, and it's so fun teaching them. I mean, it's exhausting, but it's great. And I think the younger you can get this into young people, the idea of just working together and seeing results, physical results, if that's in money or in artwork that you can then do something with, it's great.
I think the point Sophie made earlier that builds on that is really important, is this thing about taking ownership of something at a very young age and releasing something, something of yourself in it and nurturing it and seeing that, you know, out in the world in some shape or form.
It's like taking it to the next level every time, rather than, right, we'll do some art today, we'll do some art and then we'll do something else with it. Like always taking it to the next stage, I think is interesting.
It's that sort of iterative process of testing and learning and making that part of everyday activity, rather than it's all about getting to the end of the course and then can you remember what it was that they taught you, and that just feels a bit out of date.
Yeah, I think things are going to change, especially with Khan Academy, which is an online learning resource where you basically watch videos, you learn it through video, and then maybe in the classroom you would practice what you learn. But it means that your age no longer matters, because the faster you can learn these things, or at the speed at which you're comfortable, you will just carry on this process and then take what you've learnt at home and practice it with a teacher or a mentor. I think the way that things are set out in terms of your age is actually quite restricting as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's absolutely, back to John's question, how can we change things? We need to encourage people of different ages and different backgrounds. It's the whole thing I've got from the Fusebox experience. It's like the more rich and diverse, the more people learn from each other. It sounds bloody obvious, but stimulating that is the challenge.
So testing your approach and testing Fusebox 24 really needs to go out from digital cluster places and into much more widely geographically spread places, maybe even into different subject contexts, like in a company about doing something else completely different. So it's a methodology, it's a philosophy, and so how could you do it in my hometown, Hastings? Would that work? Where would you start?
You can start in so many different places. You can, it's interesting, I'm about to start working with Amex and just going into a corporate climate and saying, okay, let's do something different today. Let's try this workshop, or like, here's a course for 1 month, it's free, just come on board and see what you feel. Or it could be a short course for 1 week, but offering it to all of the people in Hastings is, I think, fine, finding a cluster of people and saying, okay, for 1 day only, we're going to do something different. Just trying lots of different versions of it, and not having it over 6 months, not just having it for 1 hour, just trying all these different ways of getting it out there. I'm not sure.
I think you're absolutely right about trying it in different ways. I think you have to be sensitive to local areas and how the artistic community exists and operates in certain places. We don't want to try and graft the Brighton experience on everywhere else. It's very much about encouraging people to come together, and there's a set of tools and approaches and experiences that are valuable, and so we might not have the recipe as such, but we've certainly got some really good ingredients and some methods, and trying things in a place like Hastings, absolutely, love to. And I think if, like you say, in a rural area, it's a different setting, somewhere remote, or where you've got the challenge of drawing on the sorts of experiences that Sophie's talking about when thinking about internationalising and so on, when you can genuinely use online to bring people together in a meaningful way, rather than, again, just trying to use digital tools for the sake of it. Yeah, it's really interesting to try all these things.
So it's not really about place, it could be about using the internet to join up global connections. And that sounds like a really important facet of that latest project of yours.
It's so important for me to start working with the internet and really using that, because I think, I don't know, I think by the end of my lifetime, people won't care about where you are in the world. We'll just be working globally. I think this is really important to start practicing now and not worrying about petty things going on in each country, but really trying to work together. And I want to start practicing that now by speaking to people all over the world and seeing what similarities and differences there are in your culture. Are you having the same problem as us in Brighton, where we can't get work, but here's some tools that you can use as well. What do you have for us? And just trying to work on that is really exciting, because you realise that everybody's so similar. I don't know, that's what I'm starting to find anyway from working with people in Korea and Italy and Japan and New Zealand. We're all willing to participate online, visually as well, and it's so playful, and there's nothing intimidating about what we're doing. I think everyone can come on board the online project, whereas if you're in one place teaching one course to a set of people, it can be quite limiting. But online, there's so many more opportunities. It's really interesting.
So that's my final question to you both, actually. follows directly on from what you've both been talking about, and it's a rhetorical question. So it's, after everything we've heard about your creative activity, basically popping up in the high street, and your creative activity bringing people into a kind of digital cluster environment, does this mean that the art college has now moved? Does this mean that the question now is, where is the art college? Where is the art college now? Where do you think it is, Sophie?
Where is the art college? Where is where is the creativity where you can be sensitive to your own emotions and your own growth and learning, and where you can share that with other people? I think it's online. I think creativity should be expressed in a physical form where you can paint and you can make and you can express yourself, and sharing it online so that you can discuss and theorize and test and shake the boundaries should be shared online for other mentors around the world to discuss and contribute to. I don't think you need to pay so much money anymore to go into a space and be taught by wonderful mentors. I really don't. I think it's too expensive now. And I think it's unfair because it's elitist for people to be given such incredible courses when you could really create that course outside of that environment for almost no money whatsoever. I think it's online. That's where the art college is.
Do you think are there some special skills that you would need as an art college lecturer or as a convener of art activity online that are particular? I mean, this is a bit like museum curators and the concept of open authority. They still need their museum curation skills, but it's been brought across to a different kind of place. They're doing their museum curation skills online. So is the art college in this less tangible space, does that still require the same set of skills in terms of teaching art skills?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a teacher, I just happen to be teaching and I really enjoy it. I don't even think you need a PGCE anymore. I think if you are organised and you're determined and you want to share and help people and yourself, you probably have the skills for it. So I'm creating Nice to Meet You as a programme. So it's an online programme for people to take part in. There'll still be mentors, professionals who come in and guide me through that process, and the artists involved as well. So I think it's still important to find specialist people.
So that probably is still the art college offer. So it's that
specialists.
Kind of, it's actually gone from being in an atelier or a salon or an art college studio into this less tangible space.
And being mindful of the fact that this is online, so yes, we're asking people to use their bedroom probably as their studio to create the artwork, or use their laptop on their bed to create the artwork that's going to be exhibited online and offline, because things have changed. People don't have huge studios anymore. People use their bedroom as their studio, and it's really looking at that and just working with it. But yes, the expertise is really still so important, and just keeping with a program that works and developing on it and changing it and trying to make it grow over time.
So the same question to you, Jim. I mean, probably taking you in the direction of Fusebox 24, but where is the art college?
Well, I think it's still a very important concept, the art college, and it is all about experimentation and play and creating a space within which there aren't bounds of creativity, but there are support structures which may tend towards the formal more than Sophie's describing, and I sort of see it, I suppose, as being less about an institution as a fixed physical space, but more as the use of the physical space when that's an appropriate part of the learning experience. But also, I agree about the role of online. I've been in online for a long, long time and learned everything I know, I guess, from other people and mediated by online in lots of ways. And I think that's inevitable, but it's not about sudden shift from the art college as physical building to everything being just online. We seldom give up entire concepts. It's going to take time to work out what the blend is, but for me the art college is an innovation college really now, and I use that term in the broadest sense in that, not just because I've spent the last year researching innovators, but I genuinely think that artists have always been innovators. the way that they approach the world and the way they approach each other. And I think what we're trying to stimulate now is new ways of encouraging people to interact with each other in the world. And part of that will be online, part of it will be through getting together to support each other in new ways. And so I see the concept of the Fusebox being something that is still very much a pilot, and it's a place, but I would love to see every community having a space that, will have things like 3D printing facilities, or space for people to put on entirely new shows, or ways and means of doing the sorts of creative, collaborations that Sophie's been able to.
Which is so inviting as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just closed doors. Fusebox is open to anybody to pop into, which is not what the universities have, I don't think.
Exactly. I think that's really what I'm sort of driving at, and I think that we can do that in remote areas. We can do that in places outside of Brighton. And so, it's not like trying to recreate the idea of the community centre, but it's really about, encouraging the idea that we can all innovate, and we all have to innovate, because machines and automation and robots and all that stuff, it's going to not just be about, the death of manual jobs, it's going to be loads of professional jobs going to be done in different ways.
New jobs are going to appear, job titles that we don't even know of yet.
Exactly, and the human as artist innovator is the bit that's interesting.
Okay, that's fantastic. So a lovely phrase, final phrase from Jim. Art colleges are innovation colleges now. Is that what you said?
Colleges for innovators. Yes.
Colleges for innovators, that's fantastic. We've come to the end of the live stream now. We've got about 30 seconds left. I'd like to thank Jim Byford from Fusebox 24, researcher in residence at Fusebox 24. I'd like to thank Sophie Giblin from Collective Gallery. And we'll do this again. We'll do it with other people with different subjects, but this has been fantastic. Thank you very much, Jim and Sophie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Over and out.